She holds a world record that no one wants, the most prolific female murderer in all of human history. Her victims, as many as 650 young women. At least that's the legend, that's what the record books say. But here's what they don't tell you. She was never actually put on trial. No body count was ever proven, and a growing number of historians now believe she may have been innocent, the target of one of the most cold-blooded political frame-ups in history. So which is it? Was she a monster who bathed in the blood of the young to stay beautiful? Or was she a powerful, inconvenient woman, destroyed by men who wanted what she had? This is the story of Elizabeth Bathory, the Blood Countess, and the mystery of what she really was. For 400 years, the story of Elizabeth Bathory has been told the same way. It goes like this. She was a Hungarian countess, beautiful, wealthy, and cruel. And she was obsessed with one thing above all else, staying young. According to the legend, she came to believe that the blood of young women held the secret to eternal youth. So the story says, she began to hunt them. First the servant girls of her own castle, then when they started to run out, the daughters of local peasants, lured to the castle with the promise of work. And finally, most boldly of all, young women of noble birth. And then there's the detail that made her a legend. The claim that she bathed in the blood of her victims, convinced it would keep her skin youthful and pale. It's one of the most infamous images in all of history. The numbers attached to her crimes are staggering. One account claimed 650 victims. It earned her a place in the record books as the most prolific female murderer in history. It's a horrifying story. It's also almost certainly not entirely true. To understand why, you have to meet the real woman behind the legend. Elizabeth Bathory was born in 1560 into one of the most powerful noble families in all of Central Europe. The Bathory family was Hungarian royalty in everything but name. Her relatives were princes, warlords, and kings. Her cousin was the King of Poland, and Elizabeth was no ordinary noblewoman. She was highly educated. She could read and write in multiple languages at a time when many European nobles, even male ones, were illiterate. She was intelligent, capable, and born into enormous privilege and power. At around 15, she married Ferenc Nadasdy, a Hungarian nobleman and a fearsome military commander. He became known as the Black Knight of Hungary for his brutal campaigns against the Ottoman Empire. It was a union of two enormously powerful families. While her husband was away at war for years at a time, Elizabeth ran their vast estates herself. She managed land, money, defences, and hundreds of people. She was in effect one of the most powerful people in the region, a woman with wealth, land, and authority that many men envied. Then, in 1604, Ferenc died, and Elizabeth Bathory became something that made her both powerful and dangerous. An extremely wealthy widow, in control of enormous wealth and land, with no husband to answer to, and that is when the accusations began. Rumours began to circulate that something terrible was happening inside the Bathory estates, that young women who went to work there were not coming home. At first they were just whispers among the peasantry, but the whispers grew. Then the complaints reached a more serious level. A local minister is said to have raised concerns, and crucially the rumours began to include the daughters of lesser nobles, girls sent to Elizabeth's court to learn etiquette, whose families now had questions. When nobility started asking about missing daughters, the authorities could no longer ignore it. The matter reached the highest levels of power. King Matthias II of Hungary ordered an investigation. He assigned it to the most powerful man in the kingdom below himself, the Palatine, György Thurzó. And here is where the story becomes something much more complicated than a simple tale of a murderous countess, because Thurzó was not a neutral party. He was Elizabeth's relative and a political operator of the highest order, and the king, King Matthias, had a very specific, very awkward problem. He owed the Bathory family an enormous debt, a fortune in loans that Elizabeth's late husband had made to the crown, a debt that, if Elizabeth were to be arrested and her lands seized, would simply vanish. On the night of December 30th, 1610, Thurzó and his men entered Elizabeth's castle at Chachtish. According to the official account, what they found was horrifying: evidence of dead and dying girls within the castle walls. Elizabeth was placed under arrest on the spot. 4 of her servants, the people accused of helping her, were arrested and put on trial as her accomplices. The trial was swift. Under interrogation, they gave testimony describing horrific crimes. 3 of the 4 were found guilty and executed, but here is the first major problem with the case. Those confessions were extracted under torture. In this era, torture was a routine part of interrogation, and it's a well-established fact that people being tortured will say almost anything to make it stop. A confession pulled from a person on the rack is not reliable evidence, it's simply the words the torturers wanted to hear. And then there's the famous number, 650 victims. Where did it come from? It came from the testimony of a single witness, who claimed that a woman named Susanna had seen that figure written in one of Elizabeth's private books. That book was never found. No one else ever saw it. The most shocking statistic in the entire case rests on one person's account of a book that does not exist. So let's lay out the other possibility, the one a growing number of historians take seriously, that Elizabeth Bathory was the victim of a conspiracy. Consider who benefited. The king erased a massive debt. Thurzo, her relative, seized control of the situation and helped keep the Bathory lands from being carved up by the crown, arguably protecting his own family's regional power in the process. Elizabeth's enormous wealth and estates were exactly the kind of prize that powerful men in this era destroyed people to obtain. And consider this. Elizabeth Bathory was never actually given a trial of her own. She never got to defend herself. She was never allowed to speak in a courtroom. Her accomplices were tried and executed, but the Countess herself, the supposed mastermind, was simply detained without a verdict. Why? Perhaps because a public trial of a noblewoman of her rank was politically dangerous, or perhaps because a real trial might have exposed how thin the evidence actually was, and that infamous detail, the blood bathing. Here's the truth. It appears nowhere in the trial records, not a single witness at the time mentioned it. The blood bathing legend was added more than a century after her death by writers embellishing the story. The single most famous fact about Elizabeth Bathory is, almost certainly, complete fiction. Now, none of this proves she was innocent. It's entirely possible she was guilty of real and terrible crimes. Abuse of servants by nobles was tragically common, and some of it may well have happened. The honest answer is that we will probably never know the true scale of what did or didn't occur inside those castle walls. The truth was buried under politics, torture, and centuries of storytelling. Whatever the truth, Elizabeth Bathory's fate was sealed, literally. Rather than execute a woman of her noble rank, they imprisoned her inside her own castle. According to the accounts, she was confined to a set of rooms with the windows and doors bricked up, leaving only small slots for food and air. She was walled into her own home, and there she stayed, alone, for 4 years, cut off from the world she had once ruled over. In August of 1614, a guard peering through one of the slots saw her lying face down on the floor. Elizabeth Bathory was dead, at the age of 54. The most powerful woman in the kingdom had died sealed inside a few small rooms, her name already becoming a monster's. And that's what makes her story so haunting. Not the blood, not the numbers, but the uncertainty. Was Elizabeth Bathory one of the worst killers who ever lived? Or was she a powerful woman, erased and turned into a monster because it was convenient? The men who destroyed her got everything they wanted, including the story. They got to decide how history would remember her. That's the thing about untold figures. Sometimes the people who write history aren't telling you what happened. They're telling you what they need you to believe. If this story got under your skin, subscribe. Next time, we go from a woman remembered as a monster to a man the world never thanked. A Soviet officer who, one night in 1983, chose to disobey his orders, and by doing so may have saved every single one of us. His name was Stanislav Petrov. I'm glad you're here. I'll see you in the next one.